Hey everybody, welcome to the second lesson in Unit 2. You just got done plugging in numbers to see solutions. Well, now we're going to start solving equations. Now this should be review from 8th grade, so let's take a look at the aim. I can solve equations where the variable appears only on one side of the equation by using inverse operations. Let's read. You spent a lot of time in 8th grade Common Core math solving linear equations, ones where the variable is raised to the first power only. In fact, the expectation is that you've mastered solving linear equations. Now, I know that's probably not true. You've had all summer to not do any math, so that's why we're reviewing this, right? These types of equations are so essential in mathematics, though, that it pays to work on them more. In today's lesson, we'll be solving linear equations where the variable appears only once. Okay? We will solve these equations by seeing the structure of the expression involving x and using this structure to undo what has been done to it. So I'm sure this is something you've heard before, undoing an equation using inverse operations. So let's review. Exercise 1. Consider the equation 5x plus 3 equals 23. Letter A says, list the operations that have been done to the variable x on the left-hand side of the equation in the order in which they occurred. So we're going to take a look at x, and what's the first operation that's been done? Well, it's been multiplied by 5. What's the second operation? That's the first one. The second one is you add 3. So those are the two steps that are done to it. So that's part A. Part B says solve the equation by reversing what's been done. So if I reverse my list of 1, 2, then I'm going to go backwards. So my first step then should be to subtract 3. And then the second step should be to divide by 5. So that's me reversing. So add 3, the next step is to subtract 3. If I multiply by 5, the opposite's divide by 5, and I go in reverse order. So let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to rewrite the equation, 5x plus 3 equals 23. The first step says to subtract 3, so I'm going to subtract 3. So I get 5x equals 20, 23 minus 3 is 20. And then the last step is to divide by 5. 5x divided by 5, oops, sorry. 5x divided by 5 and 20 divided by 5, the 5's cancel out, and I get x equals 4. Right? Familiar to you. Alright, exercise 2 is going to do some more practice with this, but let's talk a little bit more about what inverse operations mean. This is the most basic of all equation solving techniques. It's the most important solving technique in all of mathematics. Let's be clear. This big box here. Solving equations by inverse operations. If the variable you're solving for shows up only once, identify the operations that have been done on it, and then reverse them in the opposite order in which they occur. So basically what we just did in exercise 1. So let's try this in exercise 2 with a little bit more complicated equations. So exercise 2 says find the value of x that solves the equation. In each case, first, identify the operations that have been done to x, and then reverse them. So show each step. So what happened to x? So the first thing that happened was that we subtracted the 3, because we're looking on top here, so we subtracted 3. The second thing that was done to it was that it was divided by 2. And the last thing that was done to it was that we added 7. So now I want to reverse it, so reverse would be step 1, and actually let me do a different color because it's a lot of purple. So let me pick a different color. So the reverse would be, the step 1 would be to subtract 7, because I'm starting at the bottom here, so I'm subtracting 7, opposite of adding and subtracting. The second step is the opposite of dividing, so multiply by 2. And the third step would be to add 3. So let's see this work in the solution. So I'm going to rewrite the equation, x minus 3 divided by 2 plus 7 equals 23. So first step was up here was to subtract 7. So minus 7 on both sides. These cancel out. X minus 3 over 2 equals 23 minus 7 is 16. What's the next step? Multiply by 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2. That cancels out the denominator. And I have x minus 3 equals 16 times 2 is 32. Final step here, add the 3. Remember, I'm following these up here, this 1, 2, 3 that I reversed. So my final step is to add 3. So x equals 35. Okay, this is inverse operation. Remember, this only works when my variable appeared only once. See how the x only appeared one time? So that means I can use inverse operations. Okay, why don't you try letter B on your own? So pause the video and try letter B, and then unpause when you're ready. Okay, so what happened to x? The first thing that happened was that we added 1. The second thing that happened was that we multiplied it by 4. I'm looking up here, so I added 1 and I multiplied by 4. Step 3 was that we then subtracted 2. Okay, so if I wanted to reverse that and go from the back, so reverse, my first step would be to add 2. The second step would be to divide now by 4, so I'm reading this list and going the opposite. And my last step would be then to subtract 1. So let's try it. Let's rewrite it. So 4 times x plus 1 minus 2 equals negative 6. So now let's follow my reverse operation. So step 1 says add 2. So I'm going to add 2. Cancel these out. I'm left with 4 times x plus 1 on the left. Now I combine the negative 6 and the positive 2, and I get a negative 4. So that's step 1, check. Step 2, divide by 4. So I'm going to divide by 4. The 4's cancel on the left, and I have x plus 1 equals negative 4 divided by positive 4 is a negative 1. So I've done step 2, and step 3 now says subtract 1. So x equals, now be careful here, if you need to use your calculator to combine these two numbers, please do it. Okay, negative 1 plus negative 1 is negative 2. Okay, you can always put like a little plus sign here if that helps you see it better. That's always fine with me too. Same thing over here, you could put a plus sign here if you wanted to. We talked about that, I think, in lesson 1.3 in Unit 1. Okay? Alright, finally, last part of this lesson. There are multiple ways to do this, however. So I'm really wanting you to see the structure in this lesson, meaning I'm really wanting you to see how I could look at the purple list, see what happened to x, and the green list, see how I can reverse it, right? But sometimes there are multiple ways to look at something, mostly when we're seeing distributive property. So let's take a look at this next example that has a distributive property. I'll show you what I mean. So exercise 3 says, solve the following equation 2 different ways. In letter A, reverse the operations that have been done to x, so like we've been doing, and in B, apply the distributive property first, and then do the operations. So, we're going to reverse the operations here. Okay, and so I'm going to do the original. So, originally, the first thing that happened to this x was that I subtracted 4. The second thing that happened was that we multiplied by negative 2. And the third thing that happened was that we added 8. So if I reverse that now, the first thing we have to do is subtract 8. Oops, I accidentally erased that. So subtract 8. The second thing that we have to do then is divide by negative 2. And the third thing is to add 4. Okay, so I just made my list and I reversed it. So now let's do this out. Now I'm not going to expect you every time to make this list. If you want to just start solving this equation and not make the original and the reverse and you just know what the steps are, that's great. Okay, but if this list helps you see the structure, I'd really like you to try it. So let's look at my list. The first thing is to subtract 8, so subtract 8. Those cancel out. On the left, I'm left with negative 2 times x minus 4. And on the right, I'm going to combine 2 and negative 8 into negative 6. So that's step 1. Step 2, divide by negative 2. So I'm going to divide by negative 2. These 2's cancel out, and I get x minus 4 equals negative 6 divided by negative 2 is a positive 3. Use your calculator if you don't like working with negative numbers. My final step is to add 4. So I'm going to add 4. 4's cancel out, and I get x equals 7. Okay. But now, notice this letter B. Are these two equations the same? Is A the same as B? Yes, they're the exact same equation. But what happens if, when I look at this, I want to distribute first? I see this 2 and I think, let's get rid of that parentheses and let's distribute. So I get negative 2x, negative 2 times negative 4 is a positive 8, plus 8 equals 2. When I get this, something neat happens. I can see that on the left-hand side of my equation I can combine some like terms. I can combine this 8 and 8 together to make 16. And now my equation is a little bit easier to solve. So I can subtract 16, and this is me doing it without writing the structure. Subtract 16, I'm left with negative 2x, 2 minus 16 is negative 14, and finally undo this multiplication by using division, and I get x equals a positive 7. Notice, I got 7 both times, using without distributing and when I distributed. So the great thing about math is there are multiple ways to do things, and you can always check your work. Say I wanted to check this solution, and I really want to know if 7 was the right answer. What could I do? I could plug it in. So let's check and see if 7 works. So I have negative 2, x minus 4 plus 8 equals 2. Now I'm going to plug in 7. So negative 2, 7 minus 4 plus 8 equals 2. So let's simplify. Negative 2, 7 minus 4 is 3. 3 to 8 and a 2. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Keep carrying down that 8. Negative 6 plus 8 is a positive 2, and look at that. I end up getting the same thing on both sides, which means that yes, 7 is my solution. So like I said in the previous lesson, there are no excuses. You should always be able to check your work. Good luck on your fluency, and I'll see you in class.